Welcome back. Sports plays a major role in the development of individuals and nations. Sports has created legends and has defined the personalities of nations. From the legendary Muhammad Ali to the modern stars Usain Bolt and Lionel Messi, every child dreams of becoming a star. The development of stars and of nations requires investments and promotion of sports in schools and communities. Sadly, in South Africa, the ambition to achieve is there, but the investment, especially in school sports, is lacking. This has had an impact on the discovery of new stars and the standing of South Africa in world sports. To discuss sports development, professionalism, sponsorships and hosting of sports, I'm joined by Ray Wicksell, an American sports hero now based in South Africa, and Jean Verster, an accomplished athlete who's now involved in developing athletes. And gentlemen, a pleasure to have you with us on the program.
It's great to be here.
And something that you all are passionate about and have put in the miles, if not the, hundreds of meters into becoming legends in your own right. Let's start with you, Jean. A brief background of your story. You've been an athlete before.
Yeah, no, I started as a middle distance athlete and studied in the USA with an athletic scholarship and came back to South Africa. Unfortunately, still for a few years, we were still the boycott years. And then once we were allowed back into international athletics in '92, I was lucky enough to be one of the few at that stage who could still extend their careers a little bit. So I managed to compete in Europe and a few world championships and so on until around the end of '98, where I was doing some pacemaking work in New York Marathon and actually tore my Achilles tendon, and that was basically the end of the running days. So yes, from there on in, I started coaching and started working with some middle distance runners, Ezekiel Sepeng being one of them, and later on, you know, increased the squad and eventually started working with quite a few of South Africa's top runners.
And we'll highlight some of those in our conversation. And Ray, we've been having chats about this. An American now based in South Africa. Tell me your American story and how you ended up being in South Africa ultimately.
Boy, it was a long time ago, Tim. Actually, 30 years. I landed here October 10th, 1988 with the American team to compete against this guy. We ran against each other in the 1,500 meters, but he beat me. He actually destroyed me the last 200 meters when we were here. But I've been here a long 30 years. I feel more South African than American because I only lived 6 months in the United States and 6 months in Europe. I was a middle distance runner, and I love the country. I'm here to stay.
Now, it is your passion for sports that made me decide that I should invite you to the show and we can look at different things, you know, your own personal development in the sport and the stuff that you've been sharing with other emerging athletes and the frustrations that you share with the athletes and, of course, the bigger picture of how professionals should conduct themselves. I want to bring in the politics of the sport as well, whether it's advisable to host major events or not, and the politics of the leadership in the different sporting codes. But let's look at the development of sport in South Africa. Jean, it's my sense that in South Africa, notwithstanding the apartheid days, in recent years, I don't think we're investing enough in sport in schools. That's my impression. I don't see children play as much as I used to see them in the past.
Absolutely, I agree with you. I've actually busy working on a lecture for the German Athletics Federation, and interestingly, one of the things I'm focusing on is that in most countries you have a top to bottom structure in sport where government has plans through, you know, the Department of Sport and the Olympic committees, which then filters down into the different federations and locally into provinces and regions and then so forth into clubs and universities and then schools and primary schools, basically being the building blocks to get the people to the top. Unfortunately, in South Africa, it's almost the other way around because our sports in schools are actually very well participated in. The kids do love sport, and through their commitment and the teachers and the education department at lower levels, it's actually filtered upwards into high schools, which is very competitive in South Africa in terms of school sports. I think the future for South Africa is getting that kind of enthusiasm in sports in schools to all our schools, because in the previously disadvantaged schools there wasn't as many opportunities in sport and structured sport.
Well, I suppose, you know, I should say this, that in the past, the way I recall it, is that most of let's say, football stars would have been known during their high school days before becoming professional.
Absolutely.
But I don't think that there are that many emerging from school sports in recent times like it used to be the case in the past.
But I think our problem is, I think there's maybe I should put it the other way around. There's some places in the country where good things are happening. Maybe I'll even at this stage give an example. Prestige College, Hammanskraal.
Yeah.
People doing some good work there. I thought it's a big school. It's not a big school. It's less than 1,000 kids, a high school. And they've got literally in almost every single sporting code in South Africa, except rugby.
Yeah.
They have players and athletes and netball players, etc., even chess players in national squads. And this is a very small rural school.
Yes.
If you look at their facilities, not that great. If you look at their hostels, not that great. Now, imagine you don't have to reinvent the wheel. If you can use schools like that, and there are many of them, and I'm only using them as an example because they do very well. For instance, in athletics, I think they're probably the top athletic school in the country at the moment. And if you don't have to reinvent the wheel, but if you assist them, you give them, the kids, especially the stars in the school, better nutrition. You give them a physiotherapist or a biokineticist who can assist them with strength training and make sure there's no injuries, rather pre-ab than rehab,
And we can learn a lot from there. I'm going to come back to the Prestige school story because we can replicate this throughout the country.
Absolutely.
And I'll be asked, I wonder why we're not doing it, but there we have a model school. But let's look at how in the US they do this, because somehow it's as if anybody, at least from the world's impression, anybody who wants to become somebody in a sporting sense, whether it be athletic, it be any other form of sport, maybe except for football, except for recent times, I can see the US is emerging as a force to reckon with. But you will know them, you'll hear about them. They dominate when it comes to the Olympics. Why is that? What's going on? What are they doing differently in the US?
I think, Tim, it starts with recruiting the right talent. I mean, I had my coach recruit me. He was my math teacher, and he knew my talent when I was 14 years old already. And it's called scouts, getting the right scouts out there, developing them. And like John says, putting the whole medical team together, getting a massage, keeping kind of the racehorse healthy. But the Americans got it right. They look after the athletes, they develop them and so on. They don't overtrain them, and they prepare them for the university. Whereas here in South Africa, I think we got a lot of talent, but what happens is they just fall through the system where they're trained too hard.
Well, and I accept that resources could be a problem to some extent, but the idea of college scholarships, I find that very interesting. In the sense that young people are identified very early on, right, in their developmental years as athletically gifted, and the education system looks after them, identifies them, and then they get these offers. We don't do that much in South Africa.
Well, we do in a certain extent. I mean, I was on a scholarship myself in the University of Nebraska. Coincidentally, later on, it's also the university where Penny Haynes went to.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there's quite a few South Africans there at the moment.
Well, I know the swimming athletes, for instance, I always go to the US, but I'm talking about here. I don't hear, and I may be ignorant of the fact, but I've never heard of University of Pretoria or Fort Hare University recruiting football stars or rugby players or anything of that sort. Does it happen?
Yeah, it does. It does. And I think at the moment it's probably one of the lifelines of sport in South Africa is the university system. I think you probably know also about the Varsity Cup system that came in.
I'm happy for that. Yeah.
And that brought an extra dimension. On top of that, we have the USA Championships in all the sports, which is the national tertiary education, or universities for lack of a better word, sports structure that runs different championships in different sports. And I do think they play a major role currently in South Africa. You would remember back in the apartheid days, in terms of our sport, athletics, we had a very good system in the mines where a lot of runners came through the mines, and it wasn't only middle distance and distance runners. There were some good sprinters and so on, and it was just people getting opportunities where they previously didn't have those opportunities, and coaches and tracks and so on. But we also had another system back in those days where there was a strong competition between the military, the police force, the correctional services, and they almost bought athletes. So you could be a semi-professional athlete and be in the military or in the correctional services and get a nice office job and be almost free to train the whole day, And unfortunately, that system collapsed. So we don't have the mines sport or running system anymore, the athletic system anymore. We don't have it at that level anymore in the military or the police. So what was left was the universities, and they had to fill that gap as well. So currently, the universities is a very healthy system. It's probably the only place in the country where they have paid coaches, and facilities, and they do a pretty good job.
I get a sense, Ray, and I want to hear your opinion on this. What does sport or sports mean to children, to a young person? Why is it important? Because sometimes one gets a sense or a feeling that we regard sports as an indulgence of sorts, a by-the-way thing. Yet, people spend so much time participating or watching sport. But what does it mean in the development of a child?
I'll tell you what it meant to me when I was young. I looked up to these sporting heroes. I always wanted to get a scholarship when I was young. I wanted to make sure I had a good education in high school and that I wanted my university paid for. So the American system is we had a lot of these university stars going to the high schools and giving talks and clinics and so on to inspire those youngsters like myself to go to university. So that, I think, is lacking here. There could be more of that here. I don't think we have the sporting heroes here that we have in the United States. And that is really needed all over the country with some of the greats, the rugby players, the cricket players, the athletes, going more to the children and inspiring them to start doing sport, because when you're in sport, it gets you away from alcohol, it gets you away from drugs, and what it does long term, it gets you to plan. It gets you to set goals, which is very important because you can transfer those energies from sport into the business world.
Ray and Jean Verster are my guests, and we are talking about the meaning of sport, sponsorships, and the commitment to professionalism, and whether it is worth our while as a people to now and again be hosting major sporting events. And you can talk to us or share with us your thoughts on the hashtag, the Modise Network, and we will be back with you in a moment.